Are you feeling afflicted? Today we find ourselves in the midst of a world in which many, perhaps ourselves, are feeling afflicted. It's a common enough feeling. Hardships come straight toward us as though they were directed at us. A sudden job loss, the unexpected breakup of a relationship, a fatal diagnosis, one's car stolen or one's house damaged in a storm. You probably identified with Job's lament in the first reading of last Sunday's Mass. I have been assigned months of misery, and troubled nights have been allotted to me. If in bed I say, "When shall I arise?" then the night drags on. I am filled with restlessness until the dawn. Job's emotional state cannot be assuaged with Tylenol nor an hour on YouTube. Nor is it a clinical depression to be treated by a psychiatrist. Job's is an existential affliction that robs his life of meaning and value and the desire to keep on living. An abyss of dread, of emptiness, of pain has opened up before him, just as it can for us. Job's affliction, like our own affliction, is personal and immediate. In the past few weeks, a friend's child in the womb was lost for no apparent reason. Two people I know who are just my age find themselves hospitalized and immobile. The people I met this past week in a poor neighborhood of San Salvador have, until recently, been afflicted by gang violence that kept them close to home and isolated from friends, church, school, and work. They and we might conclude, as Job does, "My life is like the wind. I shall not see happiness again." So how are we to move on from this desperate place? In his letter to the Romans, St. Paul says that he can boast of what afflicts him, because affliction produces endurance, and endurance builds character, and character embodies hope. And, he writes, hope does not disappoint, because the love of God has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit that has been given to us. To boast of one's afflictions. Such an odd phrase, but somehow very much St. Paul. I think he means that he has discovered, as a matter of experience, that affliction, painful and hope-destroying as it can be, in fact challenged him to resort to his faith in God. And not just yesterday's faith, but his own newly discovered faith at a yet deeper level, a place inside himself that he may never have visited before. Miraculously, God responded, not with emotional fireworks nor sudden realizations in the mind, but with what Ignatius calls an interior movement of the soul, a hardly noticeable shift in the tectonic plates of his being that suggested a divinely given perseverance in the face of his affliction. This faith is not an intellectual assent to abstract propositions, but rather an intuition, one that deepens over time, of the goodness of all creation and of the value and importance of one's own life. This intuition gave St. Paul the determination to confront his affliction, to face it down, and to remain steadfast in spite of the affliction, trusting that God's Spirit in him would help him remain resolute. God's Holy Spirit will help him reject any demons of fear and discouragement and fill him with hope so that he can continue to live his life and do his essential life work. Recall the text I just read to you. Affliction produces endurance, and endurance builds character, and character embodies hope, and hope does not disappoint, because the love of God has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit that has been given to us. I have just spent a week in San Salvador. This was my first visit, and it gave me first-hand access to affliction, that of the poor people I met, as well as that of Archbishop Romero and Father Rutilio Grande, of the 6 Jesuit priests and of their housekeeper and her daughter at the University of Central America, all of whom were assassinated by members of the military. Their affliction was an interior state of fear and dismay at the opposition that confronted them, because of their defense of the poor. Such opposition would have, but for the grace of God, robbed them of any courage to continue their work. We must not pass too quickly over a phrase like, "for the grace of God," as though it were just a throwaway line. Why else would they have persevered in what they had been doing, despite the very real threat to their lives? They knew from experience that St. Paul was right, that affliction produces endurance, and endurance builds character, and character embodies hope, and hope does not disappoint, because the love of God has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit that has been given to us. Jesus possessed just this character, not because he was divine, but because he learned it growing up, as you and I do. As he did what he did, the power of the Spirit present in him poured into the people that came to him, producing miracles, as the Gospel says. You and me too. Did you know that we can do what Jesus did? Not perhaps in that public, showy way, but in the reality of our relationships, we can help one another be rid of the demons of fear, anxiety, worry, anger, and bitterness. We can help one another receive the Spirit of God in the midst of their affliction, and so find a way to remain faithful and persevering. The empowering Spirit of God flows into all of us as we gather and pray. Let's respond to the Spirit's invitation to face our affliction, to persevere, and to be companion to those whose afflictions are far worse than anything we can imagine.